today I was just walking to the park to have some time sitting in the sun, and I noticed that I had the urge to take a picture of a random hubcap that was sitting there on the side of the park, and I had an urge to make shadow of my hand on the hubcap and take a picture. And I was thinking that that's somewhat random, or it appears to be random. And then I was sort of thinking about myself and how I notice certain things. So I noticed the hubcap, and then I wanted to make a picture out of it. But then I realized that I myself notice things, and then I could take a picture or not. But basically, that I'm noticing things all the time. So I'm sort of a camera in that way, and I'm recording what it is that I notice, or at least making note of it. So when I was walking into the park, there was a Slurpee cup from 7-Eleven sitting there, and I was thinking, maybe some people walk into a park and notice the garbage and make note of it and sort of think, oh, I can't believe people litter garbage around the park. And then there was the sound of a chainsaw or maybe a pretty loud weed whacker, and I noticed that. And I'm one to notice the human sounds that are overlaid on the sounds of nature. So there's a nice bird chirping, and then we as humans are always making some kind of noise over top, whether it's airplanes or lawnmowers or chainsaws. And I've even gone so far as to imagine every single person in their yard at the same time decided to do some kind of extracurricular noise making. It would be quite loud. And I guess I'm sensitive to sound. So I do notice those things, whereas other people might not notice at all. And then I started to think about how whatever it is that I notice is what I am. So if I didn't notice that sound of the chainsaw, it wouldn't really exist in my reality, or on an unconscious level it would, but not consciously. So I notice it because it bothers me. But then there's a lot of things that I notice that don't bother me, that actually bring me into the present moment. Though perhaps the noise brings me into the present moment too. But my reaction to it is the same as my past reaction. Instead of just witnessing it, I'm complaining about it. I'm bringing in my own interpretation. And if I notice something so-called beautiful, for example, when I was walking here, I noticed a really, really long dandelion that had gone to seed. And along this stretch of boulevard, there was only 3 dandelions, 2 of which had gone to seed, and they were so long. And I was thinking, or maybe it came to my mind, that I wonder if they're so long because they can sense there's not really other dandelions within range. So they know they have the responsibility to seed a wider area. So due to that, they grow extra long. Now, I have no idea if this is true, and somebody with scientific inclination could go about spending the next 10 years proving things and facts about why dandelions grow to be the sort of typical length or smaller length. I'm noticing here the dandelions, they're quite short. And I could almost say this is because it's an area here that gets mowed quite often. So maybe they almost know that the mowing is going to happen. So they figure, I better just produce this flower and then go to seed versus spending too much time dicking around. So I don't know if that's true, but it was just something I noticed. And I guess part of noticing something, after a while of just observing it, maybe 20 seconds, my intellect comes in and wants to make some kind of hypothesis about it, which perhaps is a different dimension than the enjoyment in judging, in saying right, wrong, good or bad. My brain doesn't usually operate that way, except under certain circumstances. But it does like to make hypotheses, or maybe it's always asking why. Why is it this way? Why not another way? I'm not exactly sure about that. But it's something that I noticed. So I kind of like the thought of I am what I notice. I am what I tune into. And why do I tune into certain things? And why does the tuning in process sometimes seem to take on a life of its own? Sometimes my mind tunes into something that is often referred to as psychosis. And when that happens, it seems that the process has a life of its own, that it lives through me, that may or may not be related to me. It may be related to me, but it seems to hyper-associate some of my past feelings, actions, deeds, traumas to others, or maybe almost seeing how this happens to others or that happens to others because this happened to me, so I can see how that would happen to other people. It's a very bizarre process, and it could be an accelerated form of learning of sorts that is very uncomfortable. It's very alien to me. It's not a process that people enjoy. If it was, then nobody would end up asking for help, or whether voluntarily or involuntarily, through the services available. And the services available are okay up to a point, but this last experience of psychosis nearly, for me, got turned into something that I did not want to happen. And luckily I was able to prevent it this time. But my concern is next time. And I guess now I want to devote my life to preventing needing to go to the hospital. I don't know if it's a necessary evil, and this past time seemed evil to me, and maybe it was just the evil inside of me projected outward, but maybe I feel like I've seen enough of my evil. I don't want to see more. I want to be finished with that. So some people call this spiritual emergence or spiritual emergency, or there's different names for it. Mine seemed nothing. Like it had nothing to do with spiritual anything. It was more like a hell, which I guess is not divorced from spirituality. In seeing all these hellish elements within me, related to me, connected to me, part of me, a potential in me, a possibility in me, not separating myself from any possibility of human endeavor, from the highest, so-called highest, to the lowest. It's all within me. And if something happened in a certain way, it could be brought about without my real wanting to participate in that. So these are things I'm exploring. I don't know. To me, it felt like it was necessary, but it was also very, very painful, and I suffered a lot. And to me, I felt like a lot of the suffering was not my own. But I looked at it. I took very, very few medications to settle myself down. And I'm hoping that by staying with these awful things that are within my consciousness, my mind, the field of human potential, from high to low and low to high and back again. I hope that I learned what I need to learn from that, and it doesn't need to repeat itself, because I've seen that everything is within me, and I don't know if I need to go beyond those elements that I maybe haven't processed properly, like some anger issues that often get blocked off by the medications I'm on, and then I think, oh, I don't need to deal with them. But they're still there, acting in the background. And I don't know how. I guess the most frequent way to deal with things that have happened is to be a victim of it. So I've had things happen, and I was a victim, and I'm mad at the perpetrators. But I've seen that I've perpetrated things that maybe I don't realize I perpetrated, or I could go so far as to say I've seen some things I've been in my past lives or in my present life that I'm not proud of doing. But at the same time, I don't know how to integrate them in a positive way. I've had some ideas about it, but ideas are different than putting things into practice. So that might be where I'm at, is putting things into practice. I read a great quote in a book called, I don't remember, but basically it said something about, I don't care about what happens to you in your spiritual emergence process or your visionary state or whatever the heck it is. I care about what you do with it after the fact, afterwards, after it's ended. And the book is called Recovering Sanity by Mr. Podville. I don't remember his first name. But basically, it was a quote by somebody in that book that was mentioned in the book. And to me, that makes total sense. I've had 4 psychoses, and each time I feel like I learn a lot. I learn a lot about certain things if I have a bit of a manic episode, and then I learn a lot if and when that gets transformed into a psychotic episode. And it's one thing to learn, but I feel like that learning needs to be integrated in my daily life, so that it's not that I have, like, why does my life need to break off into a process of psychosis where I seem to not have any control over what I'm learning or what I'm seeing or what I'm experiencing? So I usually try to do my best to learn from the experience, at least afterwards. But during the experience, I also make a lot of notes, so I could potentially go back and learn some of the things that I was experiencing in consciousness. So there's a difference between what I experience in actual fact of my bodily living. So the fact would have been I'm sitting in a psych ward, not much is going on, I'm coloring or I'm doing whatever. But what I'm experiencing in my consciousness, in my mind, that I'm aware of other things that aren't necessarily related to me sitting there in the psych ward. And those things could be many orders of magnitude removed from what's actually happening. So I could be experiencing something around my past or just the history of being female and a lot of the traumas that females have gone through just by being a female, and some of my own traumas related to that, which at some points I feel like I created those and I was just as complicit as the so-called perpetrators, but I don't know. So I doubt my experience. That's why it's very difficult for me to come out and say, this happened to me, XYZ. And then basically what I do is I take those details and then I superimpose the story of a woman that is victimized in some way, which could very well be true. But at the same time, it's difficult for me not to consider the ways in which I got myself into that situation. I got myself into that situation by not being me, by putting aside who I am. And most of the times it involved alcohol. I would say alcohol has definitely screwed up my life in ways, but at the same time, maybe that was supposed to happen. And then I could drop the maybe and say, yes, that is what was supposed to happen because it happened.